Matthew 14. So let's just get right into the word. That's the word. Okay, the death of John the Baptist. Excuse me. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." So I wanted to ask about this yesterday uh, in Matthew 14, 1, no, 2. Uh, why does Herod think John was raised from the dead? He definitely never was. In Matthew 14:2, Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, expresses a superstitious fear that Jesus is actually John the Baptist, returned to life. His reasoning stems from a combination of guilt, local folklore, and the miraculous nature of Jesus' ministry. Guilt and a seared conscience. Herod had recently executed John the Baptist to satisfy a prideful oath. Oh, okay. I thought this was. I didn't realize. Okay, the story's being told a bit out of order, I guess. Or I'm just understanding it wrong. Because later here in verse 6, it explains when John the Baptist is killed. But I guess this is like a. It's telling the story a bit not chronologically. But that's okay. Okay, so I understand. Okay, so he said to his servants, King Herod said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." Okay, so he's talking about Jesus, not John the Baptist. Got it. For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." So he stole his brother's wife, I guess, while they're still married. And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet, him being John the Baptist. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. So his brother's wife, whom he stole, her daughter danced for him, and he liked it so much that he said, "I'll give you whatever you want." Verse 8, prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guest, he commanded it to be given. Dang. He sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Oh, my neck's killing me. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Man, I got a frog in my throat. This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They do not need to go away. They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, oh my gosh, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. I wonder why they mentioned how much was left over in Matthew 14. 20. Why does it make it a point to mention how many baskets of bread left over? In Matthew 14:20, the detail about the 12 baskets of fragments isn't just a fun fact about the cleanup crew. It's a deliberate theological signal. In the Bible, numbers and leftovers are rarely accidental. Here's why the detail matters. Evidence of abundance. The primary purpose is to prove that this wasn't just a clever snack sharing session or a symbolic gesture. By collecting more leftovers than they started with, 5 loaves, it underscores that the miracle was creative and overflowing. It demonstrates that in God's economy, there is more than enough for everyone. Oh, okay. Cool. I never thought of it that way, obviously. Symbolism of the 12. The number 12 is deeply significant to the Jewish audience Matthew is writing for. The 12 tribes, it represents the restoration and provision for all of Israel. The 12 apostles, each disciple carried a basket, serving as a physical reminder of their role as provisioners for the people under Jesus' authority. A link to the Old Testament. This miracle mirrors the manna in the wilderness found in Exodus 16. However, there's a key difference. Under Moses, the manna would rot if kept overnight. Under Jesus, the bread of life, the provision is so stable and abundant that it can be gathered up and saved. Dang, okay. See, all this stuff just would have gone over my head completely. It suggests that Jesus is the new Moses, but one who provides a superior, enduring sustenance. Wow. This is a bit off topic, but I'm just curious. How do you pronounce Jesus? Possessive tense. Jesus is Jesus? This always bothers me. The pronunciation of the possessive Jesus or Jesuses is actually one of the most debated topics in English grammar and phonetics. There are 2 standard ways to handle it. The most common in modern English, even if you write it as Jesus with no apostrophe S, most people pronounce it with an extra "es" sound at the end. Jesus is. That's what I thought, but it just doesn't sound right. I don't know. The traditional liturgical style, in many traditions when reading older poetic texts, the S sound at the end of the name is often left unvoiced to avoid the clunky triple S sound. It is clunky. Pronunciation, Jesus. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that. How it works, you pronounce the name normally, perhaps lingering a fraction of a second longer on the final S to imply possessive, but without adding a new syllable. Okay, we're going to go with that. Sorry, I just had to figure that part out. Okay. Verse 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves. So his disciples went out. They're already at sea on the boat. Jesus is still on land, and they're getting beaten up out there on the boat. for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. I can imagine seeing a man walking towards you on the water. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." The part that's interesting to me too is I always wonder, like, if, well, obviously Jesus was supernatural, but, like it's storming, so it's obviously going to be very loud. Like they're out there I assume they're on the Sea of Galilee, so it's like or they're on a lake, I think. But either way, it's a big body of water where there's big waves, enough to throw around a boat. But he can just like speak to them, and he's way out there on the water, and they hear him. Like, how do they hear him? But he doesn't say he's screaming. He just says he's saying to them. I don't know. I think about that. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So I want to ask about that. So why, in Matthew 14:28, why did Peter have enough faith to believe Jesus could allow him to walk on water, but not enough faith to stay afloat? I always wonder about, I was talking about this yesterday. I always think it's interesting that he had enough faith to even, like, to me, it would take much more faith to believe that you could even get out of the boat, get into the water, and not sink immediately. So he had no problem doing that. It was his idea. So he said, "Lord, if you command me, if you say it can be so, then tell me to come, and I believe I'll be able to walk in the water." So that's a giant amount of faith already. So he believed that much, and he obviously did it. He didn't sink. But then only after he saw the wind, whatever that means, then he became afraid. I just think it's interesting that that's what broke his faith. Why did Peter have enough faith to believe Jesus could allow him to walk on water, but not enough faith to stay afloat once he saw the wind? The wind day. Matthew 14 presents a fascinating psychological and spiritual study on the nature of focus. To understand why Peter's faith shifted so rapidly, it helps to look at the difference between initiating faith and sustaining faith. The power of the command. In verse 28, Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Peter's initial faith wasn't just raw willpower. It was grounded in the authority of Jesus. Okay. The logic. Peter recognized that if Jesus is the creator, his word carries the power to suspend natural laws. There's my answer. The result, as long as Peter was responding to the word "come," he was operating in a reality defined by Jesus' power. In that moment, the invitation was more real to him than the waves. Okay, I like that explanation. Sensory overload versus spiritual focus. The text says Peter began to sink when he saw the wind. Technically, you cannot see wind. You see its effects, the spray, the height of the waves, the white caps, etc. Okay. When Peter shifted his attention, he performed a mental calculation. He compared the fragility of his human body against the violence of the storm. Once the facts of the storm became more prominent in his mind than the fact of Jesus' presence, his faith collapsed into fear. Little faith, oligopistos. When Jesus catches him, he asks, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" The Greek word used for little faith is oligopistos. In the New Testament, this doesn't necessarily mean a lack of faith, but rather a brief or flickering faith. Doubt, distazo, this word literally means to stand in two places or to waver. The conflict. Peter didn't stop believing in Jesus entirely. He just started believing in the power of the storm simultaneously. He tried to hold two conflicting realities at once, and the more frightening one won his attention. Okay. And when they got into the boat, verse 32, and when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. Matthew 15. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." He answered them, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and 'Whoever reviles father or mother must surely die.' But you say, 'If anyone tells his father or his mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father.' So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God, you hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" So supplanting the word of God with human-made traditions and laws and commandments. So this is interesting. So I guess in Jewish Levitical law, human-made law, where did it say that? He said, "But you say, if anyone tells his mother or his father, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father." Meaning, I guess if you, in lieu of taking care of your parents, if you gave it to the church, you were absolved from that burden of having to take care of your parents. I think that's what that's saying, but let's see. Explain. Explain Matthew 15, 5 through 6. In Matthew 15, Jesus is calling out a specific brand of religious hypocrisy. To understand these verses, you have to look at the loophole the Pharisees were using to avoid their family responsibilities. The context, tradition versus commandment. The Pharisees had approached Jesus upset that his disciples weren't washing their hands according to, freaking cat hair everywhere, washing their hands according to ritual tradition. Jesus flipped the script, accusing them of using their traditions to break the actual law of God, specifically the commandment to honor your father and your mother, the Corban loophole. The practice Jesus is referring to was known as Corban, mentioned by name in the parallel account in Mark 7. Here's how the scheme worked. The vow. A person would declare their possessions or money as given to God, dedicated to the temple. The loophole, once an asset was declared or dedicated, the person would claim they no longer had the legal right to use that money to help their aging parents. Dang. The hypocrisy, often the person would still keep control of the money for their own use, but they would piously tell their struggling parents, I'd love to help you, but this money is reserved for God. Well, that explains that. Verse 10. And he called the people to him, and he said to them, and he called the people to him and said to them, Hear and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person. Dang, I like that. Then the disciples came and said to him, Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? He answered, Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Let them alone. They are blind guides. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. But Peter said to him, Explain the parable to us. And he said, Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. Man, bars. Okay, so let me save that. I like that. Let's read that again. So he said, Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. Got to hold that. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from the region came out and was crying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, Send her away, for she is crying out after us. He answered, I will sit only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She said, Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Let me save that. Let's do a breakdown on that for sure. Explain Matthew 15. (22 through 28). This passage in the Gospel of Matthew is one of the most provocative and debated encounters in the New Testament. It depicts Jesus' interaction with a Canaanite woman. Oh, I understand. Okay, with a Canaanite woman who is seeking healing for her demon-possessed daughter. To understand it, we have to look at the cultural tension, the specific language used, and the ultimate twist in the narrative. First, the request, and behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. The identity. By calling her a Canaanite, Matthew highlights her as a traditional ancestral enemy of Israel. In other words, she's a Gentile. She was not a Jew. The silence, Jesus' initial silence is jarring. He doesn't immediately grant the request, which serves to test her persistence and set the stage for a deeper lesson for his disciples. Jesus was always on it. The scope of the mission. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, meaning I was only sent for the Jews. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs, the Gentiles. The priority, Jesus is clarifying the redemptive order. In the biblical narrative, the Messiah's first priority was to fulfill the promises made to Israel, and then eventually everybody. The dogs metaphor, this is the most difficult part of the text. The Greek word used here is kunarion, which means small dogs or household pets, rather than the wild scavengers of the streets. While still exclusionary, it changes the tone from a harsh slur to a domestic parable. The children, Israel, eat first, then the pets. Oh, okay. That's interesting. The response of faith. She said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. This is the turning point. The woman does not get offended or argue her worthiness. Instead, she accepts Jesus' premise and uses it to her advantage. She essentially says, I agree that Israel has the priority, but your grace is so abundant that even the scraps are enough to heal my daughter. Dang. The commendation. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Wow. That might be one of my favorites now. I had read it before, but I didn't grasp it in that way. Okay. And the disciples are sorry. Send her away. Okay, Jesus heals many. Verse 29. Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee. And he went up on the mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they put them at his feet, and he healed them, so that the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I am unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7, and a few small fish. And directing the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 7 baskets full of broken pieces left over. Those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan. So that's interesting. So we just read about another instance earlier when Jesus fed a great crowd, and there was 12 baskets left over. Now there's 7. Surely there's some mystery there. So let's see. Explain Matthew 15, or rather, why in Matthew 15 is there 7 baskets of leftover bread, where earlier there was 12? The difference in the number of baskets between these two miracles, the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, is widely considered deliberate, carrying both symbolic and practical significance. In biblical literature, numbers are rarely I think I'm getting my screens mixed up. I was trying to scroll here and touching the iPad. In biblical literature, numbers are rarely accidental. Here's a breakdown of why those specific numbers likely changed. The symbolism: 12 baskets, which we read about, 7 baskets feeding the 4,000. This event occurred in the region of the Decapolis, which was primarily Gentile, non-Jewish territory. The number 7 often symbolizes completeness or perfection in a universal sense. In a Jewish context, it could also represent the 7 nations, of Canaan that occupied the land before Israel, signaling that Jesus' provision was now extending to the whole world, including the Gentiles, the non-Jews. Okay. It's good enough for me. And you got into the boat and went to Magadan. Okay. So what are we at now? Oh, right at 30. Perfect. Okay. So we'll wrap it up here today, folks. Thanks for coming out. Don't forget to drop a sub. We'll pick it up with Matthew 16 tomorrow. Good night.